It's one of the most greatest aviation mysteries on how one of the most modern and safest jets simply vanished from the sky.
Malaysia 370 identify climb level 180,
So why can't we still find Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 10 years later? This is the story of Malaysia Airlines 370, and it starts off at the late night at Kuala Lumpur International Airport on the 7th of March 2014. On the late night of the 7th of March 2014, Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Malaysia, was bustling with passengers getting checked in. Among them were those boarding Malaysia Airlines flight to Beijing. Unknown to them at the time, they were about to become part of one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. The aircraft flown on that day was an 11.8-year-old Boeing 777-200E, registered 9 Mike Romeo Oscar, and had been delivered to Malaysia Airlines back in 2002. The aircraft had no previous incidents and could survive with 7 hours of fuel. In the cockpit, there were 2 pilots flying this overnight flight to Beijing. Sitting on the left was the captain of the plane, 53-year-old Zahari Ahmed Shah, who had joined Malaysia Airlines back in 1981 and had experience flying the Boeing 737 and the Airbus I330 before becoming a 777 pilot. Sitting on the right was 29-year-old First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid. He has joined Malaysia Airlines in 2007, and this was his first time flying the 777. On board were 12 crew members, all Malaysian citizens, and 227 passengers. 154 of them were Chinese, including 1 from Taiwan, 38 Malaysians, 7 Indonesians, 6 Australians, 5 Indians, 4 French, 3 Americans, 2 Canadians, 2 Iranians, 2 New Zealanders, 2 Ukrainians, 1 Dutch, and 1 Russian. At 12:27 a.m., Flight 370 finished boarding and requests for pushback. Here are the actual recordings of the conversations between the control tower at Kuala Lumpur and the first officer.
Malaysia 370, good morning. You want requesting push and start. Kuala Lumpur, morning, pushback and start, runway 3 to right, exit via Sierra 4.
Captain Zahari then started taxiing to runway 3 to right for takeoff. At 12:40 a.m., Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 lines up at runway 3 to right, and the tower gives clearance for the plane to take off.
370, 3 to right of takeoff. Nice. 3 to right, Malaysia 37. Thank you.
Very shortly at 12:42 a.m. Malaysia Airlines leaves the runway, leaving behind the bright lights, which were Kuala Lumpur. The plane climbs steadily towards the night sky.
Malaysian 370. Malaysian 370, selamat pagi. Identify climb flight level 180, cancel aside turn right direct to Ikari. Okay, level 180 direct Ikari, Malaysian 370.
The control tower at Kuala Lumpur had just instructed Flight 370 to climb to flight level 180 and to take a shortcut straight to the waypoint Ikari. The only thing left for the pilots was to get permission to climb to their final altitude, 35,000 feet, and at 12:50 a.m. that approval came from air traffic control.
Malaysian 370, climb flight level 350.
Climb level 350, Malaysian 370.
So far, everything was going routine for both the pilots and air traffic controls. The pilots have leveled their plane at 35,000 feet and expected it to be smooth for the next 4 hours before arriving into Beijing.
Malaysian 370.
Malaysian 370, maintaining level 350.
Malaysian 370.
Inside the plane, everything was calm and quiet. Many passengers had fallen asleep, and the flight attendants were giving out meals to those passengers who were still awake. The plane approached the Gulf of Thailand, and the plane reached the limits of Malaysian control. The control tower at Kuala Lumpur hands the plane over to the controllers in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam at 1:19 a.m.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night.
Captain Zahari replied with this.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
The control tower at Kuala Lumpur was expecting Flight 370 to contact Ho Chi Minh controls in less than 1 minute. However, 20 minutes later, there was no response from Flight 370. The controllers at Kuala Lumpur and Ho Chi Minh tried desperately to call them, but there was no response from the plane. Flight 370 was officially missing after Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 lost contact with air traffic control 1:21 a.m. on March 8, 2014. Malaysian authorities immediately began efforts to locate the aircraft. They reached out to neighboring countries, inquiring whether the plane had landed in Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, or Hong Kong. These efforts were met with negative responses, adding to the growing concern. Despite these initial worries, many officials assumed it was a temporary communication issue, expecting that the aircraft would reappear on radar or establish contact as it approached its destination. As time passed, Malaysian authorities contacted Beijing to check if the plane would land at its scheduled time of 6:30 a.m. When it became clear that the plane had not arrived and there were no signs of its whereabouts, the gravity of the situation began to unfold, leading to escalating alarm and the onset of a broader search effort.
Breaking news tonight, a Malaysia Airlines flight with 239 people on board, including 4 Americans, has gone missing.
After midnight, disappeared from radar about 2 hours into its flight, somewhere over the South China Sea. They don't know any more than that. They're being extremely careful about what they're saying.
On the day of the incident, search and rescue operations had begun at the South China Sea, since that was the place where the plane went down at. Unknown to them at the time, this was the wrong spot to search for the plane. The search of the missing aircraft had many countries involved, including Malaysia, China, India, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Vietnam, the United Kingdom, and the United States. This is not the first time a plane has mysteriously vanished. In 2009, Air France Flight 447 disappeared while flying from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. The pitot tubes on the Airbus A330 froze, causing the autopilot to disconnect. Instead of holding the side stick steady, the first officer continuously pulled back, lifting the nose of the aircraft and causing it to stall. It took investigators 2 years to locate the wreckage. However, the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 presents a different and even more complex mystery. 3 days after Flight 370 went missing, Malaysian authorities confirmed that the plane had deviated from its planned route. It had turned back towards the Malaysian peninsula and then made another turn towards Penang. This was possible because, even though the plane's transponder was turned off, it was still tracked by primary radar operated by the Malaysian military in Langkawi. Primary radar works by emitting radio waves and detecting any reflections off objects, like an aircraft. Unlike transponders, which can be turned off by the aircraft, primary radar cannot be disabled from the plane itself, allowing it to track the aircraft's position independently. After this, many people assumed that the plane tried to turn back and land most likely at Penang's airport due to an emergency, and therefore, search and rescue operations shifted to the Andaman Sea, since that was where the last primary radar contact was made. After losing contact with primary radar, investigators turned to Inmarsat, which tracked Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 using automated handshakes or pings from the aircraft's communications system. Analyzing these signals' timing and frequency shifts, Inmarsat determined that since the last known position of the plane was elsewhere, it could not have been in Africa or Northern Asia. Instead, it had to be in a specific small strip of the arc. Every hour, as new data came in, a new arc would form, helping to refine the likely route into the southern Indian Ocean. This crucial information guided subsequent search efforts, though the exact location of the aircraft remains a haunting mystery. As the search goes on, the plane was still not found, or even a single piece of the plane, until a year later. We are now in Reunion Island, next to Africa, around 4,000 kilometers away from the main search area. A group of locals were cleaning up this island until they found an unknown piece. The piece was determined to be a flaperon from a plane, and it had date markings which had it confirmed to have come from a Boeing 777, as this aircraft was one of the world's safest aircrafts. Flight 370 was the only 777 missing, making this piece confirmed from the missing aircraft. This shocked the world, and now, this piece tells a lot of story. The plane had turned south towards in the Indian Ocean, unlike north to what most people had thought, and the plane was confirmed to have taken a steep dive before crashing. After the discovery of the flaperon on Reunion Island, more pieces confirmed, or highly likely to be, from Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 washed up in various locations. In Mozambique, a horizontal stabilizer and a piece of the wing flap were found. In South Africa, a piece of the engine cowling and an interior panel were recovered. Madagascar yielded a stabilizer panel and the seat frame, while Tanzania found a section of the wing flap. These discoveries, scattered across the western Indian Ocean, further corroborated the theory that Flight 370 had crashed in the southern Indian Ocean, although the main wreckage remains undiscovered. The search for Flight 370 remains one of the greatest and most expensive in history, primarily conducted by the governments of Australia, Malaysia, and China. It cost over $155 million and covered an area larger than India, yet yielded no results, leading to its suspension in 2017. In 2018, the search was narrowed down to a 25,000 square kilometer area, and Ocean Infinity resumed efforts, but again found nothing. So, what was the cause of Flight 370's disappearance? The very first theory suggested was aircraft hijacking. There were 2 Iranians on board with stolen passports from Austria and Italy. They had entered Malaysia a week earlier from Doha and purchased one-way tickets from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Based on the flight path it took, it was believed that the hijackers forced the plane to head towards Australia. A similar incident occurred in 1996 when Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961, on a routine flight from Addis Ababa to the Ivory Coast, was hijacked by 3 young Ethiopian men who demanded the plane be flown to Australia. Despite the pilot's warnings about insufficient fuel, the hijackers insisted, and the plane eventually ran out of fuel and ditched in the Comoros Islands. Out of the 175 occupants on board, 50 survived. However, it was later concluded that the 2 Iranian passengers were asylum seekers and not terrorists. Investigations revealed that they were fleeing their home country in search of a better life and had no malicious intent. Additionally, neither of them possessed the skills or training necessary to fly a plane, ruling them out as potential hijackers. This information shifted the focus of the investigation away from the initial hijacking theory and prompted authorities to explore other possible causes for the disappearance of Flight 370. Another theory suggested was a fire on board. This theory suggested that a blaze on board Flight 370 caused the crew to attempt an emergency return to Kuala Lumpur, leading to the initial turn back over the South China Sea. This idea gained traction because it seemed plausible that the pilots, aware of a fire, might have tried to head back to the nearest airport. However, the theory was later dismissed because the plane made additional deliberate maneuvers, including a right turn near Penang and a subsequent turn south into the Indian Ocean. These calculated changes in direction indicated human intervention and rather than an emergency scenario where the crew was incapacitated by a fire. This eliminated any theory that was caused by an accident like an engine failure, and only a few theories of the plane remained. Some of the more unconventional theories about Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 include the idea that the plane was sucked into a black hole, suggesting a cosmic anomaly transported it to an unknown location or dimension. Another theory proposes that extraterrestrial beings abducted the aircraft, leaving no trace behind, though this lacks scientific support. Additionally, a fringe theory speculates that the FBI hijacked the plane as part of a secretive operation, though there is no credible evidence to support such a claim. These theories, while intriguing to some, remain speculative and are not supported by substantial evidence. One theory that hasn't been fully discussed is that someone on the plane deliberately caused its disappearance. This would require a person who knew the airspace well, was capable of flying the aircraft, and could disable both the transponder and the SATCOM system, which is the satellite communication system used to relay critical flight data. Much speculation has centered on 53-year-old Zahari Ahmad Shah. Growing up in Penang, Zahari had a deep passion for aviation from a young age, supported by his family, who bought him model airplanes and encouraged his career as a pilot. He had a flight simulator at home for emergency practice and even invited friends to train with him. Zahari also ran a YouTube channel offering home repair advice. As one of Malaysia Airlines' most experienced pilots, he was well acquainted with the airspace. His personal life showed signs of stress, including relationship issues, and no apparent plans beyond March 8th. Authorities found that Zahari's home flight simulator had mapped out a route similar to MH370's final path, suggesting he might have intended to take the plane deep into the Indian Ocean and crash it. So now, we return to the moment the plane disappeared near Igari. The following sequence of events, while not definitive, is plausible and requires few assumptions. Just seconds after saying goodnight to Kuala Lumpur Control, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah asked First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid to go into the cabin to get him a cup of coffee. When Farik left, Zahari locked the cockpit door. As Farik prepared the coffee, Zahari had other plans. He closely monitored the waypoint Igari as it approached. Igari is unique, being one of the few waypoints bordered by 5 airspaces: Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, and Singapore. Disabling the transponder in Malaysian airspace would arouse suspicion, but doing so at Igari would make the plane's disappearance less noticeable. As the autopilot switched from Igari to Bitted, Zahari disabled the transponder and turned off the plane's exterior lights. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Farik finished making the coffee and prepared to return to the cockpit. However, Zahari had no intention of letting Farik back in. The cockpit door, designed to prevent hijackers from entering, was securely locked. As Farik tried desperately to re-enter, Zahari donned an oxygen mask and began the flow of oxygen. He then reached up to the overhead panel and opened an access hatch. Suddenly, there was a tremendous whoosh inside the plane, jolting everyone awake. Before anyone could put on their oxygen masks, Zahari disengaged the autopilot and began a steep left turn. The first officer was slammed against a side wall and had only seconds to grab a portable oxygen mask. This sharp maneuver was not done for dramatic effect. Zahari aimed to avoid entering Thai airspace, where military bases could scramble fighter jets in response. To his relief, he successfully skirted around Thai airspace. Passengers who managed to don their oxygen masks listened intently to the cabin crew's instructions, who announced that the flight would be diverting to the nearest airport. After successfully avoiding Thai airspace, Zahari had to focus on navigating across the Malaysian peninsula without detection by either the Malaysian or Thai air forces. He gazed out at the bright lights of Kota Baru, formulating a meticulous plan to fly along the border between Malaysia and Thailand. By doing so, he intended to exploit a potential blind spot in radar coverage. When Malaysian radar picked up the plane, they might assume it was under Thai control, and when Thai radar detected it, they might believe it was handled by Malaysia. This strategic maneuver required precise navigation and an intimate understanding of the regional airspace, both of which Zahari possessed. Meanwhile, in the cabin, the situation for the passengers and crew was becoming dire. The emergency oxygen masks had been deployed, but their limited supply was running out. As the masks began to lose their effectiveness, Passengers and crew members started to experience the debilitating effects of hypoxia. Gradually, they became unconscious, and without intervention, this lack of oxygen would lead to their eventual death. Zahari gazed out of his window as he neared the end of the Malaysian peninsula. Fariq, barely able to stand, made his way to the right side of the plane and looked out of a window. Desperate to call for help, he tried to turn on his phone, but Zahari had disabled the SATCOM system, preventing any communication. After completing this task, Zahari made a right turn near Penang, a symbolic farewell to the island where he had grown up and which he would now fly over one last time. During the turn, for the first time Fariq knew where the plane was. He could clearly see the island of Penang, along with its airport, to where he had flown many times. As the plane turned, his mobile phone briefly connected with a tower in Penang, registering a signal for just a few seconds before it went silent. Realizing that help was beyond reach, Fariq's oxygen mask soon ran out, causing him to lose consciousness. With Fariq incapacitated, Zahari's secret plan continued unchallenged, leaving him the sole person in control of the aircraft's fate. This turn around Penang was more than just a nostalgic glance at Zahari's hometown. As part of his plan to make the plane disappear, the maneuver was strategic. Had he continued on a straight path, the plane would have soon entered Indonesian airspace over the island of Sumatra. This would have been highly risky, as the Indonesian military would likely investigate any unidentified aircraft appearing on their primary radar. By turning right and flying over the Strait of Malacca, Zahari ensured that the plane remained within Malaysian airspace, avoiding the complications of entering a new country's airspace and potentially attracting unwanted attention. Zahari needed to confirm that there was no one still alive that could ruin his plans. He made a PA announcement to the plane for anyone to come up to the cockpit, but no one eventually came. Now, none of the 238 passengers behind him could challenge the man in the front. However, Zahari's plan was far from secure, and there was still a significant risk of detection. He knew that he was still within Malaysian airspace, and the Malaysian military could potentially spot the plane and scramble fighter jets to investigate. Zahari turned on the radio to listen to air traffic controllers communicating with other planes on the radar. Hearing nothing about an unidentified aircraft, he knew his plan to blend in was working. The Strait of Malacca was a busy flight corridor, with many planes traveling from Singapore and Kuala Lumpur to Europe and the Middle East to the Malaysian military at Langkawi. Flight 370 would appear just another dot on the radar, blending in with the other aircraft. At 2:22 a.m., Flight 370 slipped off from Langkawi's primary radar. Zahari had accomplished the seemingly impossible, making one of the world's largest passenger aircraft vanish from the skies. The final step in his plan was to turn the plane left and fly it deep into the Indian Ocean. As he looked to his left, he saw the sea of lights from the island of Sumatra before executing the left turn, setting the aircraft on its final course into the vast, empty expanse of the ocean. After completing the left turn, Zahari pulled back on the yoke and began increasing the plane's altitude to around 40,000 feet. He understood that flying at a higher altitude would burn less fuel, allowing the plane to travel further into the Indian Ocean. This higher altitude also meant that if the plane were to eventually descend into the ocean, it would do so in a more remote location, making it harder to locate and recover. For the next few hours, all Zahari had to do was wait for the plane to run out of fuel. 5 hours later, Flight 370 was flying over the Indian Ocean. Inside the cabin, there was an eerie silence, as it had been for the past several hours. Everyone on board, except for the man in the cockpit, had already perished. Shortly after 8 o'clock that morning, the plane's engines ran out of fuel, and the aircraft had no power left. Zahari pushed the yoke forward, sending the Boeing 777 into a steep and terrifying dive. As the plane approached the ocean, it reached supersonic speeds, causing the wing's flaperon to detach. Moments later, the plane shattered upon impact with the ocean. This is the story of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Lessons have been learned from this incident, highlighting the need for robust, uninterrupted communication between aircraft and ground control. Enhancements in satellite communication infrastructure now ensure that aircraft remain in constant contact with ground stations, allowing for real-time communication and monitoring. These improvements help to prevent similar situations and enhance aviation safety by maintaining a continuous link between planes and controllers. This video is dedicated to the families and friends of the victims who lost their loved ones, to help them better understand what really happened on board their flight and to support their ongoing efforts in advocating for a new search for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. If you have made it through this video, it is clear that you are enjoying this content, so make sure to like, comment and subscribe to my channel.